When the blinding rainbow radiance finally receded, Han Lei realized that he had not merely survived a calamity, he had been cast into an unknown world. Heaven and earth were severed, space itself stood silent, and the laws he had relied upon no longer felt absolute. In this sealed fragment of reality, escape was uncertain, danger was unseen, and the price of survival might very well be measured in decades of isolation. If you enjoy my way of explaining and storytelling, don't forget to like and subscribe, it really motivates me to keep creating. As the flood dragon's roar gradually faded into silence, its massive image spiraled once through the air before dissolving into a streak of light that vanished into Han Li's back. A deep crimson radiance flared behind him, and in the next instant, the vivid image of a 3-inch-long blood-red flood dragon appeared slithering across his body as if alive. Crimson light began to pulse rhythmically from Han Li's flesh. Thumb-sized glimmering scarlet scales rapidly emerged across his body, overlapping tightly like divine armor. A sharp, piercing pain surged from the crown of his head, and a small crimson horn pushed its way out. His hands hardened instantly, becoming incomparably tough, while his fingers elongated into sharp, blade-like talons. At first glance, Han Li's transformed appearance bore some resemblance to the Elder Devil trapped within the sword formation. However, his face remained unmistakably human, and the scales covered only his body. In contrast, the Elder Devil's entire head was draped in scales of dark violet, and both of its faces exuded a far more sinister and malevolent aura. Through the spirit subjugation talisman, Han Li had forcefully merged the power of the flood dragon's soul into his true essence, pushing his cultivation to the very threshold between early and mid-nascent soul stage. Bathed in intertwined azure and crimson light, Han Li tightly grasped the Blood Devil's sword with both hands and poured every last drop of his magic power into it. The sword began to tremble violently, letting out a low, resonant hum as crimson radiance surged along its blade. In an instant, it expanded to nearly 3 meters in length, saturating the air with a thick, putrid stench of blood. At the same time, the crimson horn atop Han Li's head blazed with dazzling brilliance, a clear sign that he was drawing upon the flood dragon's soul to its absolute limit. With the lesser Elder Devil trapped inside the sword formation, Han Li had already steeled his resolve. He would not allow the main Elder Devil to rescue its counterpart and merge into a single, far more terrifying existence. Yet, judging by the main devil's terrifying speed, it would arrive long before the sword formation could fully close and finish off the lesser devil. The only option left was for Han Li to personally strike it down. Once that was accomplished, he would flee without hesitation. There was no chance he could withstand the full might of the main Elder Devil. Although wielding the Blood Devil's sword would inflict severe damage upon his true essence, Han Li had no intention of prolonging this battle. As soon as the lesser devil was slain, he would retreat immediately and leave the remaining foe to the other cultivators. Otherwise, he risked suffering irreversible harm to his cultivation foundation. After all, having slain one Elder Devil by himself, the others would have no grounds for complaint. However, at that very moment, the Blood Devil's sword revealed an unsettling greed, as though it were utterly insatiable. In the blink of an eye, it had devoured the majority of Han Li's remaining cultivation. The sword's crimson glow surged even more violently, extending beyond 20 meters in length as its aura condensed into something far more terrifying. Han Li was deeply shaken by this sudden turn of events. When the lesser Elder Devil witnessed this scene, his gaze locked rigidly onto the swordlight. A trace of unmistakable fear surfaced on his face. Losing his composure, one of his ghostly heads roared harshly, "Are you seeking your own death? A mere human dares wield a sacred artifact of our holy realm so recklessly. Do you intend to become a devil yourself?" Han Li merely sneered coldly. Without sparing the devil a glance, he continued to channel spiritual power into the sword, utterly ignoring the furious warning. The Elder Devil's rage erupted. Fully aware that Han Li was determined to take his life, his expression darkened as his entire body flared with crimson light. With one hand shaped like a blade, he severed one of his own arms in a single decisive motion. The cut was unnaturally smooth, as polished as a mirror, and not a single drop of blood spilled forth. The instant the arm was severed, he caught it with another limb and spat several mouthfuls of blood essence onto it while chanting an ancient, guttural incantation. The dismembered arm immediately erupted in crimson radiance, twisting and warping grotesquely before rapidly reshaping itself into a sword that closely resembled the Blood Devil sword. The blade was formed entirely of sleek white bone, shrouded in dense, pitch-black, devilish chi. With a casual wave, countless threads of devilish energy coiled and surged around it. The elder devil raised the bone sword before him and poured the entirety of his devilish chi into it, causing it to blaze with ominous black radiance. Han Li's eyes narrowed slightly in surprise, but the killing intent within him surged even stronger. Though he could not yet gauge the true might of this grotesquely forged weapon, its bizarre method of creation alone made it impossible to underestimate. Having made his decision, Han Li abruptly ceased channeling power into the Blood Devil sword. Gripping the violently trembling blade with both hands, he let out a low shout and slashed downward with all his strength toward the elder devil trapped within the sword formation. He could not allow the devil even a moment to fully unleash the bone sword's power. A 30-meter-long arc of crimson swordlight tore through the air, cleaving straight toward the aureate sword formation. Before the swordlight even arrived, the lesser elder devil was already engulfed by the overpowering stench of blood. The air around the formation trembled violently, and even space itself began to distort as an indescribable vibration rippled outward. The elder devil was utterly shocked. This was clearly the Blood Devil sword being wielded at its full power. If his memory served him correctly, sacred tools of the Holy Realm could only be used at half strength by human cultivators. Could this terrifying increase be related to his transformed state? Though he had lived through countless ancient battles, he had never encountered anything as inconceivable as the spirit subjugation talisman. Yet with death looming before him, hesitation was no longer an option. Both of the elder devil's heads screamed simultaneously as he raised the partially charged bone sword to meet the attack. A streak of black radiance, barely half the size of the crimson swordlight, shot forth to collide head-on with it. Crimson and black light crashed together. A deafening boom shook the heavens. Violent waves of chi exploded outward like a raging tempest. Senior Marshal Brother Chang was blasted backward more than a dozen steps before he could barely stabilize himself. Han Li, supported by his temporarily heightened cultivation, was forced back only half a step before regaining his footing. The elder devil, however, remained unmoved, staring nervously at the clashing swordlights above him. Then something utterly unexpected occurred. As the shockwave dissipated, the overlapping swordlights vanished, replaced by a fist-sized jet-black sphere suspended in mid-air. It twisted unnaturally, its shape rapidly distorting. In the blink of an eye, it elongated into a massive rift 15 meters long and over a meter wide, stretching ominously above the sword formation. Before Han Li could even process what was happening, an expanse of dazzling rainbow light erupted from the pitch-black rift. The rainbow light appeared with terrifying speed, and due to its close proximity, instantly enveloped both Han Li and the lesser elder devil. A tremendous suction force followed, dragging them inexorably toward the dark opening. Senior Marshal Brother Chung narrowly avoided being caught, having already been flung a dozen steps away by the earlier shockwave. Not good. A spatial tear. Han Li's heart plunged into terror as he desperately struggled against the rainbow light. Yet the moment he attempted to mobilize his magic power, his face turned deathly pale. Every last trace of magic power within his body had vanished. Cold sweat drenched Han Li's back. As the spatial tear threatened to swallow him whole, he frantically beckoned toward the bamboo cloudswarm swords forming the aureate sword formation. The lesser elder devil was likewise powerless terror, fully exposed on both of his ghostly faces. As the rainbow light dragged Han Li and the elder devil, toward the spatial tear. Neither could offer even the slightest resistance. A clear, resonant chime rang out from the formation, and over 100 streaks of golden swordlight shot forth, transforming into meter-long gold-red arcs that raced toward the tear. At the same moment, a violent explosion erupted nearby. A ball of black devilish flame flickered into existence beside the spatial tear, surging wildly before being extinguished. In its place stood a towering figure, imposing and awe-inspiring, like a divine devil incarnate. Upon seeing his counterpart being pulled into the spatial tear, the main elder devil was filled with both fury and alarm. Hovering nearby, careful not to approach the tear's lethal range, he noticed the last of the bamboo clouds-warm swords flying toward Han Li. Instantly he grasped at the air. A colossal devilish hand materialized above the swords, reaching down to seize them. The swords rang sharply and swerved at the last moment, narrowly evading the grasp and shooting straight into the spatial tear. However, two of the swords lagged slightly behind and were caught frozen immobile within the giant hand. At that instant, a shrill cry pierced the air as a purple ball of flame streaked in from an unknown direction. Plunging directly into the spatial tear, the giant elder devil froze in shock. Before he could react further, the spatial tear flickered several times, rapidly shrinking before vanishing without leaving a single trace behind. Only senior martial brother Chung and the towering elder devil remained. The elder devil stared at the spot where the tear had disappeared, his expression wavering uncertainly. Slowly he turned his gaze toward senior martial brother Chung, a savage, murderous light blazing across both of his faces. Senior martial brother Chung's heart leapt in alarm. He hastily summoned his yellow flying sword for protection and retreated step by step, silently cursing his misfortune. Yet as he glanced around, a flicker of relief crossed his face. From 300 meters away, a voice rang out from among a group of green-robed cultivators. "Eh, isn't that fellow Taoist Cheng? What are you doing here? And what is this devilish monster?" A green-robed elderly man stared in shock at the two-headed, six-armed elder devil. He was none other than Dongmen II, the Grand Elder of the controlling spirit sect. Standing behind him were three nascent soul cultivators formed from elemental spirit nascents. "That's right. I would also like an explanation," another gloomy voice echoed. A dozen black-robed cultivators appeared, disciples of the ghost spirit sect, led by Elder Zhong. Both groups stared at the vanished spatial tear, their faces filled with disbelief. Senior martial brother Chung forced a bitter smile and spoke with difficulty. "It's a long story. For now we must deal with this monster first. Be extremely cautious, this devil is terrifyingly powerful. A single mistake will mean death." Dongmen II and Elder Zhong exchanged puzzled glances before signaling their subordinates. The cultivators quickly spread out, surrounding the 10-meter-tall Elder Devil from a cautious distance. The Elder Devil's two ghostly heads slowly turned, examining the human cultivators encircling him. One face curled into a cruel sneer, dense killing intent pouring forth. The other wore an eerie, inscrutable smile tinged with mockery. Without uttering a single word, he raised his hands toward the heavens. 4 enormous black blades of light condensed into existence above him. With a faint tremor, the blades let out a piercing, ear-splitting shriek. When senior martial brother Chang saw this all-too-familiar sight, his expression instantly turned grim. The instant the spatial tear engulfed him, Han Li was drowned in blinding rainbow radiance and instinctively shut his eyes. At the same time, the abrupt disappearance of all magic power within his body left him dizzy and violently nauseous. If not for his flood dragon transformation forcibly sustaining his physical strength, he was certain he would have already lost consciousness. Moments later, Han Li suddenly sensed the spiritual power within him stir once more. His magic power surged back in an instant. Overjoyed, spiritual light flared across his body as he swiftly regained control, steadying himself mid-air. At that very moment, the surrounding rainbow light flickered violently several times before abruptly vanishing, revealing his surroundings. Hanley swept his gaze across the area and his figure instantly blurred, retreating more than 30 meters away. He had spotted the elder devil right beside him, causing his heart to jolt as he instinctively leapt back. Without the need for closer inspection, Hanley immediately grasped their situation. The spatial dimension they had fallen into was no more than 100 meters wide, with everything inside plainly visible at a glance. To his disappointment, there was no one else present, only himself and the elder devil. As he moved, Hanley also noticed that the spiritual chi within this space was astonishingly dense, far surpassing that of the outside world. Several spiritual herbs and medicinal plants grew scattered about, and nearby stood a stone pavilion connected to a partially collapsed corridor. The boundaries of the space were sealed by walls of thick, impenetrable grey mist. It was clear that this place was an abandoned medicinal garden. Hanley was inwardly shocked, but with a powerful enemy standing before him and his life hanging by a thread. This was no time to investigate such matters. Azure light flowed across his body as he coldly fixed his gaze on the elder devil. Clenching his fists, arcs of golden lightning crackled across his form, while a ball of deep purple flames materialized above him and began to revolve slowly around his head. The purple apex flames had followed him into the spatial tear just in time, much to his relief. They would undoubtedly prove invaluable in the battle to come. As for the elder devil, both of his faces revealed astonishment after surveying their surroundings. A strange expression then crossed his features, and he let out a low chuckle. "To think there would be a spatial remnant of a spirit ether garden here," he said with evident delight. "At the brink of calamity, I encounter such great fortune." The elder devil threw his head back and let out a wild howl, but abruptly fell silent as one of his heads turned sharply toward Hanley. Hanley responded with a cold snort. His sleeve trembled and several dozen golden flying swords shot forth, forming a dense blur of swordlight before him. However, his expression darkened in shock. Two of his auric essence refined bamboo cloud swarm swords were missing. These swords were bound directly to his soul, yet at this moment he could not sense them in the slightest. It was clear that the two swords had failed to enter the spatial tear alongside him. Hanley could only let out a bitter laugh inwardly. If it had been any other magic treasure, the loss would have been tolerable. But the bamboo cloudswarm swords functioned as a complete set. Without those two blades, he could no longer deploy the aureate sword formation, drastically reducing its peak combat power. Suppressing his frustration, Hanley pointed toward the flying swords before him. Drawing upon the lingering power of the spirit subjugation talisman and the divine devilbane lightning to fortify his defenses. Seeing Hanley prepare for battle, the elder devil curled his lips and flicked his tongue with a vicious expression. Devilish chi erupted from his body, and in the blink of an eye, it flooded most of the spatial dimension, filling the air with howling yin winds. Hanley let out a deep breath and summoned all of his remaining divine devilbane lightning. His body blazed with golden light as over 100 arcs of lightning burst forth, condensing into several flood dragons as thick as bowls. The lightning dragons coiled around him, roaring skyward in a domineering display of might. "You still have so much divine devilbane lightning," the elder devil exclaimed in shock. But moments later he let out a cold chuckle and silently raised his hands. Two violent gusts of yin wind surged from his palms, merging with the devilish chi in the air to form countless black tentacles of varying lengths and thicknesses. Although divine devilbane lightning could restrain devilish chi, it was clearly insufficient against such an overwhelming volume. Both Hanley and the elder devil understood this instantly. Hanley's expression turned grim. What troubled him even more was that his blood shadow evasion was completely ineffective. Within this spatial dimension, escape was impossible. He could only fight. With a harsh shout from the elder devil, all the tentacles coiled simultaneously before surging toward Hanley with crushing pressure. Hanley steeled himself. The golden lightning flood dragons circling his body let out thunderous roars as they charged forward to meet the incoming mass of tentacles. At the same time, he willed the purple flame above him to expand into a blazing wall of fire in front of his body. Just as the battle was about to erupt in full, the spatial dimension suddenly began to tremble violently, releasing a deep groaning roar. A blinding white light burst forth from the sky, rapidly transforming into a dazzling silver radiance. Both Han Li and the Elder Devil froze in shock. The clouds overhead churned violently, morphing into roiling silver flames. Then, with an earth-shaking boom, a massive beam of silver light descended from the heavens, striking directly at the Elder Devil's position. Centered on the Elder Devil, a towering pillar of silver light erupted, instantly annihilating all devilish chi it touched. Han Li caught a glimpse of pure terror on the Elder Devil's faces before they were engulfed by the silver flames, his entire body burning away into ash. The pillar of light then exploded outward, scattering countless silver embers throughout the spatial dimension and purging every last trace of devilish chi. When the radiance finally faded, nothing remained where the Elder Devil had stood, only completely ruined magic treasures lay scattered on the ground. As the final remnants of the Elder Devil were erased, the silver flames swiftly withdrew, and the grey mist surrounding the space returned to its former stillness. Han Li stood alone, his face filled with utter disbelief. Silver flames. Such a ferocious restriction is clearly not something of the mortal realm. How astonishing! A voice suddenly echoed from the depths of his mind. It was the monarch of soul divergence. What do you mean? Where did those silver flames come from? Han Li snapped out of his stupor, delight flooding his expression as the immense pressure vanished. With a sweep of his hand, he recalled his golden lightning purple flames and flying swords. The monarch of soul divergence fell silent for a moment before sighing softly. Given their ability to effortlessly obliterate an Elder Devil, those silver flames clearly did not originate from the mortal realm. They actively sought out evil chi and targeted only the devil. This leaves but one explanation: cultivators of the spirit realm intervened. It seems the ancient cultivators' eventual victory over the Elder Devils was due to assistance from the spirit realm. Han Li's heart stirred. Senior means to say that the masters of this spatial dimension were spirit realm cultivators. His voice carried a hint of emotion as the monarch of soul divergence replied, "Precisely. This should be the ruins of one of the famed spirit ether gardens of antiquity. In ancient times, peerless cultivators could rely on powerful treasures to open small spatial dimensions, using spiritual chi far surpassing that of the mortal realm to cultivate spiritual medicines. These gardens specialized in nurturing all manner of rare herbs. However, some unforeseen calamity occurred, and all spirit ether gardens vanished without a trace. Future generations were unable to locate even one. I never imagined Devil Fall Valley would conceal such a place, though this garden appears to have shattered, leaving only a fragment of its former self. A spirit ether garden." Han Li murmured, excitement flashing in his eyes as he looked around. "I've seen records of them before, but I always thought they were merely legends." After a short while, his gaze shifted to the magic treasures left behind by the Elder Devil. With a gesture, they flew into his hands as streaks of light. Upon examining them, Han Li frowned faintly. These treasures had been thoroughly corrupted by devilish chi and completely purged by the silver flames. Their spiritual essence was utterly destroyed, no matter how much effort was spent refining them further. They would never recover even a fraction of their original power. Shaking his head, Han Li casually stowed the items into his storage pouch. Crimson light then flickered across his body as he withdrew the spirit subjugation talisman. The talisman flew out from within him and landed in his palm. Examining it closely, Han Li muttered, "This spirit subjugation talisman can only be used one more time. I've already exhausted most of its power." He then descended to the ground, his sleeve trembling slightly. A small, snow-white fox flew out in a flash of white light, transforming into Silver Moon. Silver Moon curtsied lightly and chuckled. "I thought Master would summon me to assist in the previous battle. I didn't expect to be called now instead. Your cultivation was too low to be of any use in that fight," Han Li replied calmly. but you excel in movement techniques. Search the area and see if there are any hidden mechanisms or restrictions. As you command, Silvermoon replied obediently. In a flash of silver light, her figure sank into the ground and vanished. Hanli then sat down cross-legged and closed his eyes, slowly extending his spiritual sense to probe every inch of the spatial dimension, searching for any hidden secrets. His expression remained calm, but after finding nothing, a trace of disappointment surfaced. Moments later, his eyelids twitched, and an odd expression flashed across his face as he suddenly opened his eyes. He stood up at once and moved excitedly toward a corner of the spatial dimension, where several dozen deep purple berries hung from an unusual plant, gleaming faintly with spiritual light. The monarch of soul divergence cried out in alarm, "Yee! That appears to be a dream prominence fruit, and it has already turned a deep purple. Its medicinal potency must be at least 10,000 years old." Suppressing the excitement surging in his heart, Han Li replied calmly, "This abandoned medicinal garden's age is unknown. If its medicinal effects weren't at least 10,000 years old, that would be the truly strange thing." He did not immediately pluck any of the fruit. Instead, he carefully observed them for a long while before turning to inspect another corner of the garden. Dragonweave grass, wind spirit flowers. As Han Li softly uttered the names of these long-extinct spirit medicines of astonishing potency, the light in his eyes grew brighter and brighter. "I didn't expect you to be so knowledgeable about medicinal herbs," the monarch of soul divergence remarked in surprise. "There were even some that I had never heard of." Han Li raised his head and glanced in another direction, smiling faintly as he replied, "Is Senior teasing me? I can recognize only about a third of the plants here. I will still need your help to identify most of them." Apparently deeming the matter insignificant, the monarch of soul divergence did not pursue the topic. Instead, he let out a cold snort and said, "Although I have dabbled in pill refinement, I never delved deeply into it. I can help you identify them at best. That one over there is—" Hanli nodded as he listened. He then summoned a faint green jade slip into his hand and immersed his spiritual sense within it, standing completely still as if lost in contemplation. The monarch of soul divergence tactfully remained silent. After the time it took to finish a meal, Han Li withdrew his spiritual sense from the jade slip, his expression thoughtful. This jade slip had been given to him by Cultivator Song of the Drifting Cloud sect. It recorded numerous ancient spirit medicines and pill formulas, and Han Li was relying on it to identify many of the herbs in this garden. After reviewing its contents, Han Li discovered 2 ancient pill formulas that he could immediately refine. They required several of the spirit herbs present in the garden, along with materials he had obtained earlier in exchange for the copper lantern during the border battle. Barely enough ingredients remained to refine what was known as the future cloud pill. According to the formula, this was an exceedingly rare cultivation-enhancing pill even in ancient times. Its medicinal strength was far too potent for an early nascent soul cultivator like Han Li, and was instead better suited for those at the mid-nascent soul stage. If he were to consume it prematurely, much of its medicinal power would be wasted, and his meridians would swell to the point of tearing, bringing about excruciating pain. There was also another pill that he held high hopes for refining, the Snow Soul pill. Unfortunately, he was still missing several key ingredients and would have to search for them in the outside world. Unlike the future cloud pill, the Snow Soul pill did not advance cultivation. Instead, it was a supplementary pill that enhanced the glacial power of ice-based techniques. Though the pill formula's description of its effects was vague, the rarity of its ingredients made it clear that it was anything but ordinary. As for the remaining medicinal herbs in the garden, they were insufficient to complete any known pill formulas and would have to be reserved for future use. Han Li's thoughts churned as he contemplated how best to utilize these precious herbs, and he could not help but feel giddy. Ever since reaching the nascent soul stage, he had been constantly embroiled in danger and conflict, leaving him no opportunity to enter long-term seclusion for cultivation. The idea of acquiring suitable cultivation pills and retreating for several years had lingered in his mind for quite some time. Now it seemed that all his hardships had finally borne fruit. If the fuchsia cloud pill was truly as miraculous as the formula described, it could push him to the peak of the early nascent soul stage. Afterward, he could attempt to break through the bottleneck into the mid-nascent soul stage. Moreover, several of the medicinal herbs could be replanted after he returned. With the aid of the green liquid, he could further accelerate their maturation and refine even more fuchsia cloud pills. As for the snow soul pills, they were also extremely valuable to him. Both his celestial ice flames and purple apex flames possessed glacial attributes, making the pill perfectly suited to enhancing their power. With his tentative plans settled, Han Li let out a long breath. A rare smile of genuine satisfaction appeared on his face. If everything proceeded as expected, then all the dangers he had braved in Devil Fall Valley, along with the destruction of numerous treasures and puppets, would have been more than worthwhile. The only thing that left him uneasy was the loss of his 2 auric, essence-infused bamboo cloudswarm swords. However, since they were personally bonded magic treasures, he did not fear them being seized by others. As long as he lived, the bond would remain intact. At worst, he would merely need to expend some effort to retrieve them, a task that should not prove too difficult. Had Han Li known that the swords had fallen into the Elder Devil's hands, his thoughts would have been far less relaxed. Putting the matter aside, Han Li slapped his storage pouch and took out more than a dozen jade boxes of varying sizes, suspending them in the air before him. He then crouched down and began carefully harvesting the spirit herbs. After uprooting one plant from each variety, he deliberately left the rest untouched, slowly moving through the various patches of vegetation. Regardless of the type of spirit medicine, Han Li ensured that he collected a single specimen from each, intending to cultivate them further once he returned. However, after completing this process, his expression darkened. It appeared that 3 types of medicinal herbs in the garden were impossible to replant. One plant resembled the spirit kindle fruit once removed from its original environment. It withered instantly and lost all medicinal properties. Another combusted and vanished the moment it was picked. As for the third, it was particularly bizarre. It wilted as if gripped by fear before dissolving into liquid. Han Li felt deeply irritated. There were only a handful of spirit medicines in the world that could not be replanted yet. This garden alone contained 3 such varieties. What depressed him most was that one of them was a primary ingredient for the fuchsia cloud pill. It was a small crimson herb, vivid as burning flame. Han Li circled around it several times, his expression growing colder by the moment. Then, as if recalling something, he hesitated briefly before taking out a small green bottle from within his robes. This bottle had been concealed on his person using a mysterious technique. Unless he perished, no one else could possibly discover it. "What's that?" the Monarch of Soul Divergence asked curiously. "It's nothing, just a magic tool," Han Li replied casually. He then carefully opened the bottle with both hands. Nothing happened. After waiting a moment longer, Han Li frowned slightly before sealing the bottle and putting it away. This spatial dimension had no sun, moon, or stars. It was no surprise that the bottle had no effect here, but he still felt disappointed. Under these circumstances, no matter how long he remained here, he could only refine a limited number of fuchsia cloud pills, strictly bound by the quantity of usable herbs present. Han Li sighed softly and lifted his head, gazing up at the sky with narrowed eyes. Regardless of medicinal pills, there was another pressing issue he needed to resolve. He had to find a way back to the mortal realm. This time he had no companion to launch a joint attack with him. Moreover, his recent spiritual sense exploration revealed no unstable regions within the surrounding walls. When he probed upward and downward, some kind of powerful restriction repelled his spiritual sense entirely. As for Silvermoon, she had already burrowed underground using her earth movement technique to investigate further. The only option left was for Han Li to personally examine the grey clouds overhead. Given the terrifying display of the restriction's power earlier, Han Li was unwilling to rashly provoke it and court his own destruction. Just as he lowered his head in contemplation, silver light flickered from the ground. Silvermoon emerged and hurriedly saluted him. "Master, I've completed my inspection," she reported apologetically. "Although there is a fragmented restriction underground, I managed to dig through it and found nothing of significance. I fear I've disappointed you." Han Li's expression did not change as he slowly nodded. "It's fine. So there truly was no exit beneath the ground. Does Master intend to search above?" Silvermoon asked worriedly. With a firm voice, Han Li replied yes. "Since there are no openings in the walls or the ground, I can only take the risk and go upward. The silver flames targeted only the Elder Devil. They should not attack human cultivators. Otherwise, I may truly be trapped here for the rest of my life." Azure light flowed across his body as he slowly rose into the sky. As the spatial dimension was not particularly tall, Han Li quickly reached its upper boundary, where nothing but rolling grey mist met his eyes. He hovered in mid-air and channeled the entirety of his magic power into his pupils, causing them to shimmer with faint blue light. With the activation of the bright side spirit eyes, the clouds before him turned a translucent blue, revealing a faint silver screen suspended motionlessly above the mist. Could that be the restriction laid down by spirit realm cultivators? Han Li's heart stirred. Raising his hand, he released a ball of azure light into the clouds. The light sphere passed through the silver restriction without the slightest resistance, continuing another 30 meters before abruptly stopping as if it had struck an invisible wall. It immediately exploded. Han Li's expression eased. His body glowed with azure radiance as he flew into the clouds himself. Yet for some inexplicable reason, a fleeting sense of unease crossed his mind. Although he had already tested the restriction, Han Li still felt a surge of apprehension as he passed through it. Fortunately, nothing happened. Just as he had suspected, the Spirit Ether Garden's restrictions seemed to target only Elder Devils. The exact relationship between the Elder Devils and this fragmented medicinal garden, however, remained unclear. After passing through the restriction, Han Li finally let out a breath of relief. He immediately expanded his spiritual sense and combined it with the bright sight spirit eyes, carefully sweeping every inch of the 100-meter-wide ceiling, yet he found nothing at all. Once the exhilaration from acquiring the medicinal herbs faded, Han Li realized that he was now facing an even greater problem. He glanced down at the shimmering silver restriction below, hesitated briefly, then decided to leave it alone for the time being. The overwhelming might of the silver flames was still vivid in his memory, and he had no desire to provoke a danger that could cost him his life. After examining the sky several more times, Han Li finally sighed. With an unmistakable trace of disappointment on his face, he slowly descended back to the ground. "Master," Silvermoon called out softly. Han Li replied expressionlessly, "I found nothing. It seems this space is completely sealed. There is no opening to exploit." Silvermoon's voice filled with worry. "Then, aren't we trapped here? Tearing through space requires the power of a deity transformation cultivator." Hearing this, Han Li's frown deepened. Suddenly a glimmer flashed through his eyes. Without another word, he walked toward one of the spatial walls. Silvermoon stared blankly for a moment before hurriedly following him. When Han Li reached a point roughly 10 meters from the wall, his sleeves trembled. Dozens of flying swords shot out in golden streaks. He rapidly formed spell seals, condensing them into a massive golden sword over 3 meters long above his head. Raising his hand, he pointed at the blade. With a peal of thunder, arcs of golden lightning burst forth from the sword and struck the wall. Han Li then opened his mouth and spat out a strand of purple flame, which struck the sword's body. Purple fire and golden lightning intertwined thunder, chaining upon thunder as the sword's power surged dramatically. With a low shout, Han Li sent the enormous sword spinning through the air. It transformed into a streak of gold and violet light that slashed fiercely at the wall. A deafening roar followed as a blinding explosion erupted, shaking the entire spatial dimension. Han Li hastily formed a hand seal, and the streak of light returned to hover before him. its radiance fading to reveal the original massive sword. As the glare dissipated, Han Li narrowed his eyes and closely examined the wall. Behind him, Silvermoon's expression fell. The strike had not left behind even the faintest mark. Han Li's gaze flickered as he sank into deep thought. Heh, youngster that would only work in your dreams. The monarch of soul divergence spoke lazily. Oh, Han Li replied without anger, his tone instead filled with pleasant surprise. Then it seems Senior knows how to leave this place. I would appreciate your guidance. The monarch of soul divergence scoffed. If you want to escape, you should first consider how you entered this place. Do you truly believe the spatial tear opened solely because of the clash between you and that elder devil? Senior means? Han Li asked hesitantly, surprise evident in his voice. It's quite simple, the monarch explained. This remnant spatial dimension barely managed to survive after being torn away from its original form. After countless years, it has been pushed to the brink of collapse. As you saw, even your strike was enough to shake it. According to ancient records, the yellow-grey hue of the walls signifies instability. It's likely that the collision between your attacks struck the weakest point of the spatial connection to the mortal realm, tearing open a passage to this place. The weakest point. Han Li frowned. Silvermoon and I already searched every part of the walls. We didn't notice anything unusual. The monarch of soul divergence snorted. Fool, the weakest point isn't necessarily on the walls. It could lie somewhere in between. Moreover, because the spatial tear itself is unstable, the weak point is likely constantly shifting. If you search properly, it shouldn't be difficult to find. Somewhere in between. Realization dawned upon Han Li. His cultivation was far too low to truly comprehend spatial principles. His understanding could not compare to the monarch's. Without further hesitation, he immediately began to search. Han Li closed his eyes and spread his spiritual sense throughout the entire space, probing every point within. After the time it took to finish a cup of tea, he finally found what he was looking for. His body flashed as he flew into the stone pavilion at the center of the pocket dimension. The light faded, and his eyes glowed blue as he stared upward at a spot 20 meters above. The area appeared completely empty, but through his bright sight spirit eyes, Han Li saw a faint blue dot no larger than a grain of rice, emitting barely perceptible fluctuations of spiritual qi. Han Li's face lit up. After a brief moment of contemplation, he flipped his hand and summoned a small crimson sword. What you plan to use that sword? The monarch of soul divergence spoke with an odd tone. That's right, Han Li replied calmly. I already know that even if I locate the weak point, my own magic treasures won't be enough to break through it. In terms of sheer destructive power, the Blood Devil's sword is the strongest option. I intend to give it a try. The monarch of soul divergence snorted. I'd advise you not to waste your strength. It was only the combined might of your transformed state and the elder devil that opened the tear. Do you truly believe the same could happen now? Your only real option is to advance to the mid-nascent soul stage. Then use both the talisman and the Blood Devil's sword to forcibly tear open the weakest point. Han Li's heart trembled. Advance to mid-nascent soul. That isn't something that can be done quickly. Even with the dense spiritual qi here and the aid of medicinal pills, it would take at least 30 years of arduous cultivation. The monarch scoffed dismissively. And the spatial dimension won't collapse in a mere 20 or 30 years. What are you so afraid of? If you were cultivating in the outside world, even with your aptitude, you might not reach mid-nascent soul even after 100 years. Han Li's expression wavered. Even with the fuchsia cloud pill, he would still need at least 20 years to reach the peak of the early nascent soul stage before attempting to break through the bottleneck. And since one of the main ingredients could not be replanted, using it here would permanently consume it. Cultivating here for several decades posed no issue. The spiritual qi was several times denser than that of the spirit. Well tree in his cave residence. Such an opportunity was exceedingly rare. His only concern was the soul seal curse placed upon Nangongwan. He wished to hurry back and dissolve it using the ancient flame toad's demon core. However, Nangong Wan had stated in her jade slip that she could delay the curse for over 100 years. Being delayed for 30 years should not pose a serious problem. After pondering for a long while, Han Li accepted that he would be trapped here for some time. With a bitter chuckle, he resigned himself to his fate. Then, without hesitation, he spoke decisively. Silver Moon harvest all the spirit medicines. We'll be refining pills for the next few days. Silver Moon, who had been listening anxiously from the side, felt an immense sense of relief upon hearing that there truly was a way out. Having been trapped once before, she had no desire to experience it again. With a sweet smile, she acknowledged the order, took a pile of bottles and boxes from Han Li, and flew off toward the garden. Han Li then sat down at the center of the stone pavilion and took out the jade slip containing the ancient pill. Formulas. With utmost care, he began reviewing the refinement process for the future cloud pill. The spiritual herbs at his disposal were limited. He could not afford the slightest mistake. That's all for today's content. See you in the next part. Support me by becoming a member. It will give me more motivation. Thank you so much.